Welcome to ENside Politics, the weekly podcast on how San Antonio politics really work. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express-News. I am joined by City Hall reporter Molly Smith, Bexar County reporter Brooke Park, and Texas politics reporter Ed McKinley. Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing an election in which deep red Texas managed to become even redder, with Donald Trump taking 56% of the vote and outpacing Kamala Harris by 1.6 million votes. Ted Cruz handily won re-election, also his best performance in a statewide race. Ed, we have a couple of local Texas House district races, a lot of attention. Tell us about what happened in Mark LaHood's race.
Sure. So this district is in North San Antonio and Alamo Heights. Mm-hmm. It's historically been held by moderate Republicans, including former House Speaker Joe Straus. Right. So this is very much like a classic kind of country club and Chamber of Commerce Republican type district.
Yeah, I mean, this is Terrell Hills. This is Almost Park, Alamo Heights.
Yeah, totally. So it was previously held by Representative Steve Allison, who was on the Alamo Heights School Board for 12 years. Mm-hmm. And then last year, he was one of about 24 Republicans that voted against Governor Greg Abbott's voucher bill. So the governor campaigned against him earlier this year. In the primary, he spent about $800,000 supporting LaHood, who was also backed by Ken Paxton. Mm-hmm. And LaHood beat Allison. So this is a lean red district. It's the kind of district that Democrats would need to win if they were going to be successful in the state in terms of picking up Democratic voters in suburban areas. But it's not a true like toss-up seat. But this cycle, they were hoping, with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, voter enthusiasm, this is something that we could pick up. And in contrast to Allison, LaHood is very much not a kind of Mitt Romney old school Republican type. He's a firebrand. He says, I say it like it is. The election was stolen in 2020. We need to bring back prayer in schools. He's ardently pro-voucher. So there was kind of this idea that Laurel Jordan Swift, the Democrat, might be able to swoop in and snag this district because such an uncompromising conservative figure had been nominated on the other side.
Right. Now, and the irony being, Steve Allison was the successor to Joe Straus, who was a moderate's moderate in the House. And, he had a rough time hanging on to the Texas speakership because, he was a relatively middle of the road Republican. The fact that LaHood won so, relatively handily, does that mean the electorate in this district, has it changed? Is it more conservative now than it was 2 years ago?
No, I mean, the margin was slightly tighter. So there's different ways of looking at it. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could look at it as the Democrats blew a chance here. But I think when you look at the broader context of the facts that Republicans overperformed from how they did in 2020, basically across the board. I mean, it was just a red wave election for them. But the margin in 121 was actually tighter than Steve Allison's last re-election. Mm-hmm. So I think, if you were inclined to be upbeat for Democrats, you could view that as a promising sign that this is going to be a true swing district in the next broader macro political environment that's more favorable for Dems.
Yeah. Does it look at this point, and I know votes are still being tallied across the state and House districts, does it look like Greg Abbott has the votes he needs for a voucher program?
Well, I think the short answer is yes, and the long answer is it depends on what the bill is going to look like. Oh. I mean, so it was very helpful to him that Republicans flipped at least 2 seats last night, which I think is a much better night overall than was expected. I think there were probably more Democratic opportunities to win seats than there were thought to be Republican ones. So this is viewed generally as a failure from Democrats. And it pads the numbers for Abbott a little bit. So if it were only a 1 or 2 majority instead of a 3 or 4, that gives every Republican that much more negotiating leverage to ask for the bill to be tweaked a little bit. And it just creates a lot more kind of points on which the whole thing could fall apart.
Okay. Let's talk about House District 118. Again, this was a closely watched race with John Lujan and Christian Carranza, feeling that she had a very credible shot at winning this. She did not. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think in contrast to 121, where if you want to get really into the tea leaves, you can make an argument that there's some positive signs to pick up from this. I think this is just a crushing blow for Democrats on every level, both in San Antonio and across the state.
You're gonna set aside.
Yeah, I think it's about as bad as it gets for them.
The good signs, no.
So it's the only race that a Republican holds office where Beto O'Rourke won it in 2022 and Biden won it under the maps that are currently in effect. So it was the race that Democrats basically they were expecting, they were hoping to win. And let's not forget too that Lujan previously held the office. You know, he won it in the 2015 or 2016. I think it was early 2016, and then lost it in the next general election when turnout was bigger. So there was always kind of this undercurrent. I mean, he won a special this time around and then he was reelected in 22. But there was always a sense among Democrats of like, oh, well, in a big turnout year, this is a blue district and it's going to show its true colors and we're going to elect a Democrat. And it did not happen.
Right.
So what do you think went wrong for Democrats? I mean, I think a lot of them were looking at Carranza as someone who had a really good ground game, raising a lot of money. There were Democrats from all across the state who were coming in and helping her out, particularly in the final week. So, I mean, what are the lessons here for the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big question that they're going to be asking themselves all across the state. I think, you know, candidate quality is important, especially in a tight race, but it's hard to tell exactly how important. So often the things that make up the biggest difference are the presidential race, the Senate race, the economy, kind of the major issues that people are really focused on. So I think those are the fact that a lot of those things leaned red across the state is important and is probably the primary reason for it. But to play the other side, like, this district has been one that Republicans have been looking at as a majority Latino district in an urban area. You know, there's this long-term GOP plan to kind of win over those voters. Many of them are Catholic, so appealing to them as social conservatives. A vast majority of them are working class, so appealing to them on with economic arguments. There's this belief that Democrats had for a long time that, well, this is the fastest growing population group in the state. Inevitably, it's going to lead to a durable Democratic coalition that's going to win statewide elections. Republicans targeted that and have been trying to chip away at it and change the narrative. And, you know, it's a little too soon to get into the data precinct by precinct in 118, but across the state, Trump won 55% of Hispanic votes, according to the Washington Post exit polls. So, I mean, that is essentially the bottom dropping out of the premise that Democrats have maintained for 20 years about their plan for winning control of the state.
Yeah, and it looks at this point like Donald Trump carried Starr County, is doing quite well, maybe has won at this point. Webb, Hidalgo, and Cameron. So yeah, a truly impressive showing in South Texas that I think nobody really saw coming, but maybe they should have.
And across the country.
Right.
I think he won Miami-Dade County.
Yeah, for the first time.
And even in El Paso, where Democrats still won, Trump did better this year than in 2020.
Yeah. Now, the fact that, you know, a lot of progressives got really excited about the race in 118 because of comments Lujan made on Texas Public Radio's The Source, saying that if his daughter were pregnant, and, you know, he would encourage her to see the child through, even if, you know, even in the circumstance of rape. That caused quite a firestorm in the campaign. The fact that in the end she still lost, does that say anything about abortion politics in that district?
You know, I don't know. It's a confusing issue. It's sort of like guns is another good example, where like if you poll people about a specific policy or approach to this issue, you'll get answers that are very popular, but then they won't actually support the candidates who support those policies. So, and maybe this is not the most upbeat thing to say as a journalist, but I think one of the bigger takeaways might just be that people didn't hear about it,
right.
or they may not.
Are you kidding? Not everybody watches or listens to the source. Oh,
and they may also just not have cared. I mean, part of his appeal to voters has always been, I'm a dad. I have this big family of my sons and my foster sons. I've been a coach in the area for a long time. I have these connections in the community as a firefighter and a former sheriff's deputy. It was very much kind of like this uncle figure guy that might have coached your kid soccer team at some point. Yeah. And so like, that guy made some off the cuff comments that didn't come out how he wanted. I think it's not that hard to imagine how some voters would be willing to give him a pass on that.
Yeah. Let's move on to more local level. Let's look at Bexar County Precinct 3. This was Grant Moody's seat. He's the incumbent. How did it go for Grant?
It was a really easy election for Grant. The early vote results came in shortly after 7. He was up 10 percentage points, and Moody, who is typically a bit more cautious in calling races, especially in his primary, which was way more contested, just kind of called it very quickly. He said...
Yeah, so this is Precinct 3. It is basically North Bexar County, reaches into Alamo Heights?
Alamo Heights, yeah.
Yeah, so this had been a Republican bastion for decades. And there was a sense that was loosening a little bit. Why is that?
Yes. Yeah, well, it's, back before 2016, before Trump came on the political scene, in this precinct, Republicans were winning over Democrats 2-1. Mm-hmm. Trump came on and that lead started to slim down. It went from about 45,000 and slimmed to 25,000 in 2020. And then in the 2020 special election, when Moody first faced off against Susan Colbell, he led by 7 percentage points, but that was he had 14,000 more votes in that election. So the distance that Republicans had over Democrats in that precinct has consistently been getting slimmer and slimmer as each election cycle has gone by since 2016. Mm-hmm. So there was some thought that, in this cycle, there would be a closer race. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't. He came out with a stronger lead than he did in 2020. He captured 10 points in the end.
Against the same person, the same Democrat,
yes,
Susan Colbell.
in a rematch race, yes.
Okay. Now, what was this race about? What was Grant Moody campaigning on?
I mean, he likes to tout, some basic kind of bread and butter Republican themes. He was really big into public safety. He said that he kind of transformed the narrative around adding additional forces to the sheriff's office. He was talking about how when he first came on to the cult in 2022, he called it a great political battle to try to get more funding for the sheriff's office. Uh-huh. And we've seen that pretty much dissipate in this last round of budget talks. The sheriff's office got 12 the constables got 12 new people, and then the sheriff's office got 41 new uniformed officers, and it wasn't a big battle as he said it was before. So he really credits himself on public safety and also lowering the property taxes that go through university health.
Okay. So by leaning on University Health's board of trustees, he got them to maximize the homestead tax exemption.
Yes.
Got it. Now, Precinct 1 was even more of a walk, cakewalk, basically, for the incumbent. Tell us about that. What happened there?
Yeah, absolutely. No contest really in the South Side, which is to be expected. That is, Democrats largely view that as a very safe district. Commissioner Clay Flores decided not to host a watch party. Before the election results came in, her campaign manager basically said, they don't expect any surprises, and there were no surprises. Early votes came in. She was 19 percentage points ahead, and it lowballed slightly down to 18 when election day results came in, but she took her second term handily.
So a lot less drama than 4 years ago. She unseated. This is Precinct 1, which is kind of sprawls across southern Bexar County and reaches up on the far west side. It takes in a huge landmass. And it had been dominated by Sergio Chico Rodriguez for 12 years?
16.
16 years. This is Congressman Ciro Rodriguez's brother, part of a political dynasty. And she took him out 4 years ago. In pretty dramatic fashion in the Democratic primary. And she has sailed easily to re-election.
Is that western? You said it hooks along the western edge of like the metro or the county. Is that a more Republican area than the south side?
It is. Yeah. So it gets more conservative and Republican as you
further
arch
away.
up. Yeah.
Sure. So that's like that sounds like what you're describing is the mirror version of 118 in a way,
right.
which stretches northeast on the other side.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously,
in a way,
I don't know analysis, but just like it's interesting that one was such a sleeper and the other one went the other way.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it's the Republicans. I think the party will in the next few, and probably next couple election cycles, will really target that. I think they'll probably put up stronger candidates. Is my guess. All right. So also on the ballot, we'll move away from human beings and move to city charter amendments.
More exciting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we're talking about this is real power, man. So we had 6 city charter amendments on the ballot. The biggest being Prop C. Molly, take it away. Tell us all about
Prop C passed and all 6 passed.
What's Prop C?
Prop C, that was the one that had the most money spent on it, the most focus. That's the one that undid the caps on the city manager's salary and tenure that voters imposed just 6 years ago. In 2018, the firefighters union was locked in this bitter contract renegotiation struggle with then city manager Cheryl Scully. They saw her as overpaid, overly powerful, and 59% of voters agreed with them in 2018 and put those caps in place. This time around, 54% of voters approved Prop C, and that will just return to city council that ability to decide how long to employ the person, the city manager, and how much to pay them.
Right. Do you think this was at all referendum on the performance of city manager Eric Walsh, or no?
It's really hard to say, partly because so many voters who are turning out just don't pay attention to City Hall. Some of them probably have no idea who Eric Walsh is.
Well, there was a UTSA poll that found 73%?
Like 7 out of 10 voters don't know anything about these propositions.
We're shocked to find it on their ballot. What's this? We have no idea.
But I think generally there are a lot of folks who are pleased with Eric Walsh's performance, so I think that did help him. I think if Eric had been less popular, it's hard to say how this would have gone. But a lot of people want to see him stay longer if possible. And even the interesting thing is the firefighters union, this time I don't think really had that strong of a campaign. They came out in opposition pretty late in the game, just 2 weeks before early voting. And they've only spent about $200,000 on the campaign, sent out one mailer, had signs, and then they maybe had 60 or so members, and they have 1,800 members, about 60 of them routinely campaigning out of polling sites, and not even at all the polling sites, just the busiest ones. So I think their campaign was not as strong, and they've really come out and said, like, we're happy that Eric Walsh could stay longer.
Do you think this was a half-hearted measure? Maybe it was union leadership following the lead of their members who maybe really wanted to defend what the union had done back in 2018 and getting these restrictions on the city manager enacted, but also not wanting to go too far in actually defeating this amendment and losing Eric Walsh. Because if Prop C had gone down, if it had failed, Eric Walsh would have had to step aside by, or, in February
2027, yes.
Yeah, do you think there could have been any of that, kind of a stutter step, not wanting
It's
to go
hard to
too far?
say. I mean, most of they polled the membership, and the membership was in agreement. It's hard to say where kind of their executive board falls on that. I'm sure there are some splits, but I'm sure that has to come into play at some point. I mean, they could have funneled so much more money on this. What they'll say is they have a lot of other priorities. Like, this is not their only thing. There's other candidates, other issues they support. But I think at the end of the day, they felt some responsibility to at least kind of defend this measure they'd spent so much time and effort and money fighting. And the way that Joe Jones, the president, will frame it is like, we just wanted to educate voters, tell them what it was about, and then ultimately we were going to leave it to them. So we weren't going to inundate them to kind of sway them. We were just going to say, this is what this amendment is doing. You all decide.
Okay. Now, city council and mayor got a big raise out of this. Tell us about that.
Yes. So Proposition E, which is the charter amendment that came with the pay raises, passed 64%. And that's going to boost their salaries by more than $24,000. The new city council, which will be sworn in for their new term in June, they'll get about $70,000. The new mayor, who will be sworn in probably June as well, will get $87,000. So pretty generous salary bumps that voters were okay approving. I think the caveat there is the way the charter amendment was framed. You don't really follow City Hall, you may not have realized you were giving them a raise. It was phrased in a way to kind of limit their salary or tie it to this thing, so you could interpret it as, oh, we're actually reducing it, or we're just saying it can't go further than this.
Right. And now the council and mayor's pay is kind of hitched to the median household income for the region, right? So
Yes.
every time that goes up, their pay will go up in tandem.
Yeah, so they'll get maybe a couple $100 increases, or maybe $1,000. It kind of just depends how much it fluctuates. I think the interesting kind of wonkier question for me is the figure they tied it to is the 2023 HUD median income. So it'll be 2025. So I'll be curious, do they get that immediate pay bump in 2025, or do they wait until 2026 to get a 3-year pay bump?
Was there any organized opposition to that?
Really, no. I mean, there was one political action committee that formed to pass all 6. And then aside from the firefighters, which they only opposed Prop C, there really wasn't a big effort. I saw, I think, outside a polling site, a sign that said no on all props, and it was by Infuse SA, which is a smaller organized group. They haven't filed any campaign finance reports, but they really weren't organized enough. So no one really came out in opposition. So it was pretty smooth sailing for the supporters. I think it was really their race to lose.
Yeah, usually politicians setting themselves up for a pay raise is doesn't go down that nice with voters. So
yeah, and it's interesting because Fort Worth, I forget the year they had this on the ballot, but it was fairly recently. They tried to get raises, voters rejected it, and in Dallas yesterday they had a charter amendment on their ballot that would have raised their mayor's pay from $60,000 to $110,000, and the council's pay from $80,000 to $90,000, and that failed. So, I mean, I guess our residents who are paying attention are fairly pleased with the city council.
And it could be that a lot of voters remember not too long ago when we were paying council members and the mayor $20 per meeting. About $1,200 a year. It was kind of a bit of a joke. One last thing before we move on from charter amendments. So we've got new terms for city council. Council members and the mayor will continue serving no more than 8 years, but the terms doubled. So instead of 2-year terms, they've moved to 4-year terms now. What? Just quickly, what do you think the impact is that going to be of that is going to be on how council members kind of conduct themselves in office? Will it change the way they operate at all?
I think that's the big question. And I mean, you've raised this point in your column, but it'll be really interesting to see how this changes the dynamic between the council and the city manager. Right now, the city manager has a lot of power because these folks are only there for 2 years and they really depend on Eric Walsh. They need to be in his good graces because they need to get projects done in 2 years to have some sort of record to campaign on. And they need him for that. Now that they'll have a bit longer of a runway, I think it will be interesting how much more they kind of push back on the city manager, on city staff, kind of what projects they focus on. Right now, they focus on sometimes really niche, hyper-local things that, a neighborhood association has brought up. And I'll be curious if they kind of think more broadly and pursue kind of more ambitious policy proposals.
Cool.
Or unpopular.
Yeah. Because there's,
You're on a longer leash.
All right, so let's bring it back around. We'll end on humans. We'll move away from charter amendments to humans. Ed, tell me how you think the next legislative session is going to play out, given kind of the realities out of this election.
Gosh. Well, I'm trying to think of a more clever way other than to just say that I think it's going to be red. I think that first off, there's a lot of like internal fights and squabbles going on at the legislature right now. Dade Phelan's trying to hang on to the speaker chair. The House impeached Ken Paxton. There's bad blood between Dan Patrick and Dade Phelan.
Right.
There's this stuff going on.
Is there any chance that Phelan keeps the speakership?
I mean, there's not no chance. I think there's a lot of people that are kind of waiting in the wings to see it become more definitive. I think we're going to get a much better idea in the next few weeks, probably with new folks taking office. But there's just so many different kind of cross currents. Like for instance, the leading opposition candidate to Phelan is David Cook, who just claims he's got, like something like a third of the House, like a majority of the Republican caucus supporting him. But he's actually on the committee that is pressing for a new trial for Robert Roberson, who he's on death row. He would become the first person in Texas for sure, I believe in the country, executed under a shaken baby syndrome argument. And now Paxton and a group of, sort of right wing or hardline right Republicans in the House are talking about that case in stark terms of why is the Texas House defending a convicted child murderer? They're kind of airing out all the dirty laundry from jailhouse snitches that gave testimony that wasn't even used in the trial, but like the most inflammatory possible stuff. So I think there's some people reading between the lines that there may be some forces that work behind the scenes trying to discredit Cook or prop somebody new up. But I think it's just a lot of open questions. And the only clear theme so far is just that it's going to be further to the right.
Right. So there was a lot of speculation in San Antonio that if Kamala Harris happened to win the presidency, Mayor Ron Nirenberg might be destined for some kind of appointment and might cut his time as mayor a little bit short. That's definitely not going to happen and there he is, with Trump as our president-elect. I don't know if the speculation has started, but I would think that people are talking about, Ken Paxton as a potential
Sid Miller
as a potential Trump cabinet members. Has that started, or is it imminent, that kind of talk?
Well, I would say for Sid Miller in particular, the conversation about how Sid Miller wants to be the next Secretary of Agriculture started long ago, and the charge was led by none other than Sid Miller.
Right. So, he wasn't shy about it.
He's like, I've been vetted by the FBI. I'm ready to serve. Like, we could call him up right now. Right. He'd probably tell us. But I think the big question, I mean, and important to mention too, the Republicans won control of the U.S. Senate. So they've got a margin to play with here in terms of confirmation hearings. And, you know, Trump doesn't have to worry about one or two people getting in his way. But you've got to think a confirmation hearing for Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's going to become the top law, presumably he would be appointed to run DOJ. So like, he's going to be under indictment and heading up the largest, the top law enforcement official in the country. Like that would be a colorful confirmation hearing. And speaking of colorful confirmation hearings, Sid Miller, I don't even know where we would be. Traveling out of state to go to rodeos. His aide, just pled guilty to stealing money and bribes for hemp licenses. So I think there would be a lot of airing of dirty laundry for those.
Fun times.
Yeah.
Fun times ahead.
And the big question, I think, is Abbott. There's a lot of folks that are wondering, is Abbott, does he want something? What does he want? Attorney General might make sense given his judicial and legal background. But also, like, Abbott has never been, I don't know that he's literally never been, I would need to check the historical polling, but he's at or near his high watermark in popularity in the state. And then when you kind of index that with his the relative amount of power and influence that he has in the state in terms of he's leveraged his fundraising like never before to boost candidates in primaries. So, that's a huge carrot that makes people want to work with him. And he used it against people that defied him, which is a huge stick, and got many of them out. So there's just a huge incentives for people to do what he wants. And he's more popular than ever, which makes all of that more effective. So if I were him, I don't know why I'd be wanting to go anywhere.
Right. Yeah. And what about Dan Patrick?
I think he said that he doesn't want. We should probably double check that actually before putting that out. But Dan Patrick has said many times he's happy being the lieutenant governor.
Yeah. Ultimately, he wants to be governor. Replace.
Well, he is. I mean, also Texas is just such a weird. I'm sure. They don't call it little governor for nothing. So I don't think there's anyone anywhere in the country that's a lieutenant governor that doesn't want to be governor.
Right.
It's just like being AG or aspiring governor.
Yeah.
But Texas is a unique setup because the lieutenant governor has his own little kingdom over in the Senate.
In the Senate.
Yeah. So he's already incredibly influential on shaping state policy.
Okay. We will leave it right there. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. We will see you next week.